meeting of the year of the Oversight Committee. I've laid out some topics for discussion. I can assure you we'll try to keep the meeting as short as possible, because I think we're already violating a travel restriction right now. So, I don't live that far away, so I think I can get home, but, well, I shouldn't have said that, but.
Yeah, it's dropping fast.
Okay, well, you have before us the minutes of the Oversight Committee on November the 10th, 2021. Any questions or comments on the minutes as presented? There's quite a bit there, and I'm sure we probably haven't got all that done, but do you have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes from the November oversight meeting.
Second?
Okay, motion properly made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, nay. Okay, ayes have it. Okay, the first thing I wanted to do is, this is a review of the Baker Tilly, which I've read through quite a bit, and there's a lot in there. There's probably a lot more than we could ever get done in that very effectively. And so we are going to have to cherry pick what needs to be done and what we think we can accomplish. And so I've laid out 4 things, and there's probably another discussion that we'll have too, whether to proceed with certain procedure or not. But the first one is establishing a better working relationship between the mayor and the clerk treasurer. That's what they recommended in the Baker Tilly report. The second is creating a code of conduct between the mayor, the city council, and the clerk treasurer. Next, how to strengthen internal controls and internal audit functions. And the fourth is document long-range development and capital planning functions. I'm not going to take these in the order that I've presented. I'm going to take the third one first. We, back before this council was seated, we had an internal controls committee, not an internal oversight committee, excuse me, which looked at internal controls. Several internal controls were implemented. In other words, how was money handled when it entered the city's coffers? Who handled it? How was it recorded? Who made the billings for that? And the proper separation. That's just a part I remember. There are other parts too. But I think we need to strengthen our internal controls and our internal audit functions. Now, those are 2 separate things as I see them. We would establish the internal controls, and I think those have been pretty well established. What we need to do is to see that these are being implemented and carried out. In other words, are they doing what we said 4 years ago we wanted to do, and how is it working, and do we need to change anything? And I will volunteer, I'm not going to volunteer anything on an audit deal, but to chase down these internal controls and bring a full report to the committee about, well, it was handling of money, it was the handling of documents, it was the presentation of bills, who presented the bills, who received the money. Did we actively try to collect things that were owed the city, all that sort of thing. And that was covered in in those past deals. And that's what I'll try to chase down is, how's it working? Is it working at all? And do we need anything to do to improve it? Sometimes we might ask somebody to do something and it wouldn't be it might be my idea, but it might not be a good idea. And so they would say, well, this works, but it could work better if we did this. And so I think we have to be careful that we don't overstep our bounds, that we look gently, and that we recommend gently. The next thing is internal audit functions.
Joe, but first on internal controls, so Misha has an enormous file of papers and processes that they're currently using that I think that would be a great place to start, is we can read everything that's in place very easily. I had a little bit of a hard time getting the file to open correctly, but then Chris helped me out. So that is information that's easy for us to access and
Okay.
good place to start, and lots of
Okay,
information there.
I'll check with her.
One other thing I would add too, my biggest concern after reading through this document is our lack, and really the biggest source of fraud potential within our city is the lack of controls around expense reports. You know, in the Marine Corps, we can't even get reimbursed for a $5 gas bill if I don't have a receipt. It's documented, it's put into the system, and it's approved by my administrative department. So I think we have to really tighten down how expense reports are being done. Who's approving them? And we've got conflicts of interest throughout the city, and we have people approving expense reports who should not be approving them. And that's on both sides of the fence, quite frankly. So I would like to see us spend a little bit of time building out a policy around that. And I don't think one single expense report should be paid out if we don't have the proper procedures, the proper receipts provided, and everything's documented and approved appropriately.
I agree.
I was amazed how many expense reports are being paid out without, quite frankly, without prior approval, without receipts. That didn't happen anywhere else. It doesn't happen in corporate America. It doesn't happen in other government agencies. And I know we're a young city that's growing, but that is one area we have got to address.
I agree.
So, may I, Mr. Edwards?
Yeah.
So, first of all, several years ago, you should have adopted a formal internal controls policy.
Yeah, this
Because-
is a form that the state puts out. We've
What-
got,
It was a requirement, yes, and the State Board of Accounts provided guidance. I don't know, obviously, what file Misha has, but you had to have adopted a policy, and so you need to start with your own policy. You may need to revise that policy at the same time you're seeing how it's being implemented. At the same time, if Misha's file is something different, then it may be just what you expressed. It may be an outgrowth of your policy needed to be tweaked, and that can't happen unless you tweak it technically. So all of those need to be looked at
Agreed.
together.
well, and we've got an audit committee now. We do have an audit committee. I have kind of turned that over to Troy to carry through with the external audit. So I don't know where we are on that, but it's kind of up to the state to decide when we can start, really. We have to get their permission to start, and I don't know whether they've responded to him or you.
Have we met all of our requirements, Joe, and what we're
I think so.
supposed to
I
do?
think we have met our requirements.
I don't believe that you have met
I don't
all
think we
of the
did either.
requirements, because the audit committee needed to send out a request for qualifications or proposals and bring back a recommendation for the full council to act on as to who would do your external audit. And then you provide that to the state. And depending on when you take that action, then you're correct that then very next upcoming audit, you need their permission, whether it can start then or whether they're going to delay you for a year. But I don't believe you've met all the requirements yet.
But
I don't think we have either.
the year that we're talking about, the earliest we could start would be 2021. Because 2020 is already done, so the earliest we could start, but it's kind of my idea to do that, and I had a few health problems there in fall, and so I was not as attentive to that as perhaps I should have been, but,
I'm happy to follow up with Troy if he's
Will you-
heading that now and see if he needs any
let me know
materials
if
to
you'll let
move
me know how
forward.
that's going. But because I think that's important that we have an audit committee, not that they're gonna do a lot of heavy lifting, but they're all CPAs. I think that's a requirement, that they all have to be CPAs. And so they will recognize certain things. I recognize certain, like the people that do the billing shouldn't collect the money. I know basic rules, but there's a lot more to it than that. So I think we do need to strengthen our internal controls. It will be up to me to read through that document again, because I've got it on my computer at home, and see what we implemented or tried to implement, and to make sure that we're following through. If you'll check with Troy and how
But
he's doing.
be certain to get whatever Jake got from Misha, because
Okay,
if,
I'll do that
if they're
also.
following something different than the policy inadvertently, then you're gonna have to sort that out as well.
Okay,
And I don't know what you got, Jake, so,
The policy is in what I got as well.
okay, good.
okay. The other thing is, and this is the fourth thing, and then I'm gonna get back to the other two things here in a minute, is the document, this is my language, document long-range development and capital planning functions. Now, we do have a planning, what do they call it, the planning guide for Washington Township, because we have a joinder for the entire township. I think we have not followed that very closely in rural areas. In other words, the best, you can't be perfect in everything, but you can infill closer to town first, perhaps, and then spread out. Well, the land is cheaper out in the country, and so the builders are driven to that. And you have to, eventually the council has to decide, how's this gonna work? Should it work this way? And, we're just happy to have growth, I think. We're gonna have to be more attentive to our long-range plan as far as that is concerned, but also in establishing our long-range capital needs. This, I think, there's a lot of shifting going on in that. In other words, some things come to the top quicker depending on how much pressure is applied. And I suppose that's right, but that's just the way it happens. And I've, since it's in my district, Tomlinson Road, and I haven't, really hit that hard, but it is a dangerous road. And it was never on the long-range capital list until recently, and we started talking about it. And so I probably got 30 or 40 emails on that from up north here. And so I've been attentive to it, but it wasn't me that did that necessarily, it was Jeremy. And so I had one guy that badgered me to death about, well, what are the details, how far are we in the planning, engineering process, blah, blah, blah. And so I simply put Jeremy's phone number on there and say, you can get more current information if you will call Jeremy, who is our Director of Public Works. But we do need to make sure that we are planning for our capital needs properly and not cherry picking, I would call it. I'm not critical of any way anything happens, because in government, sometimes you have to be light on your feet. But
I think having a living, breathing document, it makes sense. And whenever I call Jeremy, he's got the answers. He knows what his plan is. But it would be nice as a city council, and we all get those calls, to be able to look at a document and say, as of right now, it's on the docket for funding for 2023.
Yep.
Now, the thing, though, that we all have to take ownership on as well is, we as a council have shifted how some of those projects are paid for. And when we got rid of the GEO bond strategy, a lot of roundabouts were being paid from that. So I think we have to understand as well, we have to provide a vision and a plan to the city so that they can back plan and do infrastructure and all that as well. So I think both sides of the house have to take some ownership in being more organized and have a better vision long-term of how we're gonna finance, because our infrastructure costs are just gonna continue to go up.
And we've got several needs. We've got, you know, like 161st and the trail. We've got 191st Street, which will be a big-time cost. And we've got Tomlinson Road, which I think is kind of on its way. They're starting the engineering work, I think.
Yeah.
And,
And the Thompson Road piece, and out of fairness to Jeremy, we didn't own that land until
No.
this past fall. And then, you know, Hinkie finally annexed that back to us the right of way so we could actually widen it. So that didn't get on our radar screen because we didn't know when Hinkie was gonna annex that over to us. But I agree, we have to have a document that every year we're looking at and we're massaging it and communicating that to the public, because you wanna get people fired up, it's usually around infrastructure.
and we kind of have to, after we commit ourselves, we kind of have to stick to it, really. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, it'd be nice if you did it, but we are going to have to stick to our word. In other words, if we're gonna do this, we gotta do it. Well, in some cases, it's borrowing a lot of money. In other cases, maybe some of that money exists in road impact fees or whatever, but we have to be careful about committing. We gotta be able to pay for whatever we commit to in some fashion. Okay.
So
Before-
what's the game plan on that then, Joe? Are we going to partner with Jeremy to try to come up with a game plan on that, or, because I think you're spot on with that bullet point.
Well, I would like to, you know, it's gonna be a lot for me to do to, you know, chase all these details
I'll
down.
take that one on.
Okay, if you wanna take that on, that's
I'll
fine.
take that one on.
He had presented the plan to us at a prior council meeting. Now, obviously, some of that maybe has changed by now. But even if bare minimum, an updated version of that plan that's posted so that everyone can see with transparency would be a step. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to at least do that part of it.
I agree. And Ann, correct me if I'm wrong, do we have authority as council to create an ordinance to mandate a process around capital planning that the city has to follow annually, you know, every 3 years? I don't know, whatever the answer is. Can we, is that getting into the mayor's space by doing that, or?
So, yes and no. It would depend on exactly how that's structured or worded. You can adopt fiscal strategies, obviously. So if it's couched in terms of fiscal strategy or allowing for fiscal planning and the information that you need for that, then yes.
Okay.
But like most things, the devil's in the
In the
details
Yeah,
of
okay.
how you do that.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
The next thing I want to talk about, one of the recommendations in here, and I don't want to get real deep in the weeds on this one, in the Baker Tilly, and probably, I don't know how big it would be, but is the change from a third-class city to a second-class city. And I've had some conversations with the mayor about this, and there's just not the votes to go forward with that right now, I don't believe. Now, I'm just, you know, this is me talking, it's not reality, but I told the mayor, you know, he wanted me to introduce it. I'm not gonna introduce it unless I think it's gonna pass, and I don't think it will pass now.
We brought Ann in, I think it'd be good to get on the record here, in the report, it says 92% of cities that are 35,000 and above are second-class cities. Obviously, Indianapolis sits alone as a first-class city, so we're in a vast minority here in how we operate. There were all kinds of breakdowns and explanations into the different roles between how things would be decided and operated on second and third-class city in the report, but I thought if you could just maybe talk through some of the steps of what it would take for us to move from third-class to second-class city so that we at least, the public has it on record.
So, to some extent, it's, when I express the steps, they don't sound complicated. I mean, first of all, you have to have an examination, you have to divide into the proper number of council districts. And now's the time. I mean, the federal census was in 20, and so we're at 22, and using that data, you, I believe, are now refreshing the current districts. At the same time, if you wished, you could task the folks that you have working on that with doing a Plan A and a Plan B, because a precursor to the council simply passing an ordinance and electing second-class city status is that you have to have done that groundwork and passed the ordinance dividing into the proper number of districts.
By November the 8th of this year.
But again, unless I'm mistaken with the information I've been provided, you've already started on that for your current council districts?
Yeah.
That's,
We haven't started yet in Westfield.
We haven't started counting, but I think Cindy Spoljaric has expressed an opinion that we can use data that we have not upstairs here, but down 171st Street to see what the population, we have to adjust for population.
Yeah.
right.
But we have to coordinate that with the county, because they have the precincts set up, and you can't crisscross
Yeah, we can't-
precincts.
we
You
can't
can't
cross.
butcher them up. And I talked to Kathy Richardson, gosh, last week or 2 weeks ago, I was at an event and I saw, and she says, we have not done anything. We're the only city in Hamilton County that hasn't done anything. So I guess the point that I'm making is, if we're gonna look at a Class 2 move, no, it's not gonna slow anything down than where we're at right now, because we haven't, the ball's not rolling, it's sitting. I guess that's what I was trying to say by
Right.
all that.
But I am not sure that there are the votes to pass it. Now, that can change.
Can we hear the rest of the process?
Okay, go ahead.
So, I agree with everything you said, Scott. There are very rare exceptions that you can cross the precincts. So I said it sounds simple coming out of my mouth, but again, the details,
Yeah,
details
it's
are a
difficult.
bit more complicated. And so if there's discussion around this topic, then I would encourage you to go ahead and move forward with at least that part of the process. It is up to the council. I mean, you may elect and to be second-class city, and you may elect to remain third-class forever, regardless of what all the rest of the cities in the state do. It's your discretion, but if you're going to go forward with second-class, you've got to do the work ahead of time.
Yeah, and I guess I think I know what I want to do, but I don't know if anybody has enough information to make an educated decision at this point. I could be wrong. I've met with the city attorney and talked about it, actually last year, because we all knew this day was coming when we were going to pass that threshold of population. I think it makes sense to put this into public in dialogue, and let's bring somebody in to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both, and put it out to the public to also digest, and then make a decision versus maybe we don't have the votes, maybe, I don't have any idea if we have the votes or not, to be honest with you. I haven't really talked to anybody about, but I know I'm certainly open-minded to a discussion and possibly changing my mind of where I'm at right now. I think we owe it to the public to have a conversation, because it has, I think it has huge ramifications for them. It will get more residents involved in our government if we move to a Class 2, and anybody would argue that's not a good thing, really needs to take a step back. But the other thing is, there are some advantages, I think, to strategically how we maneuver as a city when we're a Class 2. It may not be the right choice for us, but when 92% of Indiana's doing it, as Jake said, and when you look at a report, and that was a big theme in their findings was the importance of moving. I think we at least owe it to ourselves to have some dialogue on it. So that's my 2 cents on it.
And in addition to that, if I may, I would encourage each one of you to pick a council person that's a longstanding council person in Fishers and Carmel. It's not as if they converted 25 years ago. That's a conversion that they've each made in the relatively short time looking back.
Bless you.
And so I believe, now I could be mistaken on this fact, but I believe you can find long-term council people on each of those councils that would be willing to share perspective with you. And that may be helpful as well.
I agree. I think it's a great idea.
I would suggest some people at Noblesville, they're fairly recent conversion to that. But Fishers, Carmel's been second class for a long, long time.
I think Fishers, though, is in the last decade, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
Fishers is fairly recent, Noblesville's fairly recent, I believe. But it's something we've got to consider, and we've got to consider it pretty quickly.
I agree. I mean, 'cause there's a lot of ramifications beyond just the redistricting council seats, but there's impacts to people, that are city employees that could lose their job. And so I think we owe it to everybody to, let's be expeditious in doing this and be fair to everybody involved.
We ought to get it in the public view, and we'll get, back and forth on that, but I still think we ought to get it in the public view. I think that we need to, I visited some with Mike Johns about this, and he says that, we need to, I think there will be something forthcoming in this next city council meeting about that. At least how we get it in the public view.
Yeah.
So we've got to do that. Now, the next.
So, but I still think the public should hear what the changes are, right? So
Yeah.
the differences between Class 2 and Class 3 and in terms of representation, the controller position, the clerk position, those things.
So, forgive me, you just gave a very quick, good summary, Jake. For example, a Class 2 city does not have a clerk treasurer. A Class 2 city has a clerk, which is basically the keeper of all of the records, and they have then a controller, and a controller is an administrative position. And Joe, I respectfully disagree with you. Carmel didn't go through it that long ago because they just changed from clerk treasurer to,
that's right, they did.
controller and clerk. So that's one of the changes. And as Scott alluded to earlier, if you elect second-class city status, then your council expands. You're going to have to perhaps fit a few more chairs up here because it expands. You'll have 3 at-large and 6 districts
You have
for
two-
the
two at
council.
lar- Yeah, 3 at large.
3 at
Three
large, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
3
but
at-large
not-
and
a
6
nine-member
districts.
council.
You may have to, kick the attorney and the clerk back out in the audience so that you have room for all the council members, but.
So regardless of whether we're Class 2 or Class 3, so that everyone knows, we have to examine the data and potentially redistrict, even if we remain Class 3. So to Scott's point, we have not started that work. We have to make a decision so that we can put the work in place regardless. If our representation goes from 7 to 9, if we elect to go Class 2, the clerk is still an elected position,
The clerk is.
and the controller is an appointed position. Those are common questions that I get from people who ask about those things. So I thought that those probably should be vetted out with detail. So again, I agree, Scott. I mean, if 92% of cities are doing this, if this was a strong recommendation by Baker Tilly, we should at minimum get public input on why. I mean, we should clearly, if we know better, and we're in the 8%, but it's right for Westfield, then that's what we should do. But we should be able to articulate that to the public as to why we're different. So I
And I
think
don't
the
think anybody
public
can do that right now.
should have a
Yeah.
clear voice in what they think, and I'd love to hear
I
their
think they'll have
point of
a hearing,
view.
after we have the public hearing, then the council or whoever our delegate designees are need to get to work and get this redistricting done,
Yes.
whichever way it is.
Joe, does it make sense, since this is kind of the Oversight Committee, does it make sense for us to make a recommendation and take the lead in bringing in a future council meeting, whether it probably wouldn't be next council, but maybe next couple into the future, to invite in city councilors from Carmel, Noblesville, Fishers, what have you, and attorneys who specialize in this. Maybe we bring back Baker Tilly to talk about their views and have a blocked-in session where we have experts coming and addressing the council in a formal way. And it's advertised in a way that the public knows this is a conversation, because I think it would be possibly a good turnout in terms of the audience.
That's possibly so, but I don't want to make a circus out of this.
No, I don't either, but I want to be thoughtful in what we're
I
doing.
don't want to make a circus out of this. I want to start off rather slowly, so I want to, follow the city council president's guide on how we'd want to do this. Because you could easily make a circus and you wouldn't gain anything out of it in the end. And so you've got to be careful how you present it. It does have to be presented, and it does have to be presented publicly. But you're going to have a lot of different people lining up a lot of different ways. And I think before that happens, let's let this soak in a little and see what people really think. I don't think we need to just speedball it down the track right now. We do need to get to work on redistricting, but I'm afraid if we try to cram it too hard, you're not going to get a positive answer.
I don't think anybody's talking about cramming it. I think we're just talking about putting it on the agenda and starting the ball rolling. I mean, we've had this report for how long now?
Long time.
3, 4, 5 months? What have we done so far? Name one thing that we've done from this report that we've tackled. Not a thing. So I don't know how slow we have to slow walk this, but my term is up in a year and a half. I'd like to get something done before I am done.
It's all got to be done by November the 8th anyhow.
Well, and that's why now is the time, or we will be speeding it and rushing it because we haven't been thoughtful in what we're doing. But I'll shut up about it, but, I haven't talked to Mike. I don't know what his plan is on this, so out of fairness to him.
Well, I don't know exactly either, but I think Mike will have some sort of plan, and I think if you want to have influence with him, just talk to him and say, here's what my thoughts are on this. We'll see what you can do, and I would urge you to do that.
I just feel like it's the responsibility of the Oversight Committee to make a recommendation.
I agree.
I thought that's what we're here to do.
Well, if you want to.
Now, if the president wants to disagree with us, that's his.
Make a motion, and if it is, that recommendation will be made. I can't, it's not binding on the council, of course, but you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only motion would be that we host a public hearing on the positives and negatives of becoming a second-class city to inform the council on a decision on which way we should go.
Why don't you guys talk to Mike and give him a chance to do that if that's what he wants to do. If not, why then, we can make that recommendation. But I think it would be easier if you talked to him yourself, said, what can we do here? And Mike is a pretty good guy to work things out, try to work it out. Okay, the last thing that I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna end up with this, the other thing is establishing a better working relationship between the mayor and the clerk treasurer, and I'm not sure that's ever gonna happen.
I don't think that's our job, to be honest with you. That's
I don't
between
either,
them.
although
Yeah.
Baker Tilly did cite that in their report. But the more important thing, I think, is a creation of code of conduct, written code of conduct between the mayor, the council, and the clerk treasurer about what will be done. I was a little chagrined that they took certain things out of the policy manual and put it in administration. I'm not sure I really cared for that. As you probably witnessed, I apologize for my loud speaking on that, but I don't think that was a proper thing to do. And I think that we have to establish, you know, I won't always be there. In fact, a year and a half from now, I won't be here, probably. And so, because I'm not gonna run again, and somebody else can handle that job. But I think we do need a code of conduct between the mayor and the city council and the clerk treasurer. Now, I would volunteer to see if, and this is a recommendation of Baker Tilly, really. It's not my recommendation. It's out of here. But I would volunteer to see what they have at Noblesville and Fishers and Carmel, if such a document exists. But we have, you know, it's kind of like the Constitution. Is it a living document or is it cast in stone? Well, you know, I don't know that I can settle that argument, but what we need to do is have something written that is a guideline for the elected people and the appointed people to follow. And that's that's what Baker Tilly recommends, a code of conduct. So I want to see if there's such a thing exists in Noblesville and Fishers and Carmel. Maybe you can help me with Carmel, and see what, you know, what that is, and is this something that we want to do?
I had asked the mayor about this, Joe, and he said essentially we rely on state statute. I've sent a text to contacts in Fishers and Noblesville and have not heard back. I just sent them this week in advance of this meeting to ask, do you have your own code of conduct and your own code of ethics, or do you rely on a state guideline? Do you know anything now, Ann, that most municipalities follow?
I don't know that I can speak to most municipalities. However, you could adopt an aspirational code of conduct as to other elected officials. You can, you know, if they will adopt it themselves and you adopt it, then you're all acting in compliance, but you can't control other independently elected officials. You absolutely can adopt codes of conduct with regard to how people behave at council meetings, and control that. It depends on where you want to go with such a code of conduct.
Carmel has something currently. I've talked to him about it. But you're right, Ann, we can only control our own house. And I think if we write a well-put-together document on that, I think we could put pressure on the mayor and the clerk treasurer to sign it. And good luck if they don't, you know, we could do that if we did feel like that's necessary, but I'm not sure it's gonna change much, but I'm certainly willing to give it a shot.
Well, that's a Baker Tilly recommendation, anyhow.
Well, so is a Class 2 city, Joe.
Yeah, I know.
So,
But,
they've made a lot of recommendations.
yeah, they have. And really, I think we got our money's worth out of Baker Tilly.
I do too. I thought it was good. I mean, yeah, there's things
We
that,
can get our money's worth
we
out
would
of
have done
that
differently, but-
BKD business, but, I think that we have to be fair. I mean, we have to be fair with people. And this is public business. I've talked to Joe Plankus too about, you know, what does the public expect of us? You know, they expect it. Well, you might be wrong about that, but anyhow.
Not the people I talked to, Joe.
Okay, well anyhow,
No way you're gonna solve the problem. It's the only way. You need to think about the residents, not what other council members think. The residents are the people you represent, not other council members.
I'm just gonna tell you what people tell me, that if we go to to a Class 2 city and our present mayor splits the difference between these two gentlemen, they won't be for it.
Well, first off, I don't care about future elections. I'm making decisions that I think are the right decision long-term for our community. I don't
Well,
care who the
that's-
mayor is.
But there's a lot of people that think that way,
Well,
so,
I think
whatever,
that's flawed.
however they think, they think.
I mean, the legacy is for this council, Joe, as you know, to, either follow or not follow the recommendations that have been put forward by PKD. Jake and I have had some conversations about terms of office.
We can't hear any of Joe's comments.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Apologize for that. So, we're gonna,
You can.
when you look at the terms of office, you could stagger the 6 districts under Class 2, have 3 and 3. One gets elected for 2 years, one, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, in that, the council has the authority to split those terms. So now you're not turning over the entire council at one time. You could take 2 at large, one election, 2 years later, you can have the other election for the other party.
This is what Noblesville does.
So
Yeah.
those kinds of things can be done as part of the implementation of the recommendations of EKD. Personally, I've heard the discussion here that, hey, some things probably won't change. Personally, I don't know that the mayor is going to run again. We have a couple people that obviously are sitting here that have indicated, one definitely and one with the committee. So to me, it doesn't matter to me who the next mayor is. What matters to me is solving the problem of getting it done. There's no pay change. Whoever runs for clerk or clerk treasurer, whatever the title is at the time, there's no change in pay. That's state law. You got to pay them the same thing. So there's no difference in that. Now, but with a Class 2 city where you have a controller and the mayor appoints the controller with input hopefully from council and other people, that person, you got one person to go to. Now, who do you go to solve a problem today? Do you go to council? You go to clerk treasurer? You go to mayor? That's why 92% of the cities changed to a Class 2. You have one person responsible. You got somebody you hold accountable. Right now, who do you hold accountable? You can point fingers all day long, and guess what? All it does is it hurts our reputation in the public. Developers have written us off, gentlemen. They've written us off. There's one project the mayor's got active right now. After that, 0. What happens? 3 years down the road, we're not going to have 13% growth in AV when you got an 8% goal every year to try to make it grow in order to pay the debts and pay for the improvements that we need to make. So there's the ramifications here don't rest with one person, whether it's the president of council or anybody else. It rests with us folks out here, and you folks are all residents too. We need to do what's right for the community, not what people think about power or who's going to have this authority or that authority. That's just a distraction. You need to look at Class 2 city. These guys have made a couple good points, Joe. I would hope that this oversight committee says, that's what we've got to do. I agree, get input, get public input, get the council. I think some great ideas you put forward today. But I don't think there's an option that you should not do that. You got to go to Class 2. I think you will solve a whole host of problems, and it really shouldn't hurt anybody in the process.
Well, I will say this, I follow politics, as you guys know, fairly closely in Hamilton County. Out of Defense Day, to the mayor and to Cindy, the struggles those two have experienced, they had the same problem in Carmel. They had the same problem in
Yep.
Fishers. This is pretty common.
It wasn't smooth.
It is what it is, and I don't think changing mayor or changing clerk treasurer is going to change the dynamics and the struggles that occur when you have a Class 3 city and you're
That's
operating the way
correct.
we operate. I just don't think it's going to change.
Class 2 fixes the problem. That is the only fix that will work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would 92% of the cities do it?
Linda?
Linda, you want to
Speaks for it.
Well, this is totally unexpected, because I do think it's up to the people. But to have Joe stand up here and say what he's saying, we're supposed to accept that? This situation that we're in, and you can call it my opinion, but I've been following this situation as long as I've lived in this city, and as long as we've had this mayor that we have had. And I am very well aware of the spying and stuff that's going on in our city, and I don't believe a mayor has the right to spy on a clerk treasurer. I have read the legal documents of these lawsuits. I had all of my information requested by that mayor and looked through. I had nothing to hide. I didn't care if you read all of my document requests. But he came in and took those with the attorney out of the office and did not leave the clerk treasurer a copy, although she's responsible to have those copies. She didn't have a copy. And just last fall, they snuck those back into the clerk treasurer's office when no one was in that office. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I knew Diana Cordray, who was the clerk treasurer of the city of Carmel. I lived there before I lived here. But I knew her when the mayor Brainerd was after her too, and there's more to that story.
I'm not picking any sides, I'm just
listen,
saying
I'm
it's
just
reality.
telling you,
Yeah.
as a CFO and a financial person by background, I watched it when I was in Carmel. I've watched it when I was here. I am just appalled at the accusations that can be made in this city. And then somebody says, well, if we just turn to a class 2, that'll fix it. Well, that didn't fix it in Carmel either. And Carmel did not change to a second class city as soon as they were able to. It was a very long time before they did that. I won't give you the date, but it was a very long time, okay? They didn't just flip it. Noblesville didn't either. So there are other considerations. But when you think that one gentleman, and we may not have that same kind of gentleman in the future, but when we have one person as a mayor and he can't live without all the power, and he can't share the power, and he can't respect a person who is doing an honest job, who's been audited every year, and you think that the solution is to put in a second-class city so that he gets to hire the person who does the books. And yeah, you can pay the same amount to the clerk. But I know, because I've been requesting documents for years in this city, and I know by fact, and I know by talking to the lawyers, that the clerk treasurer has not had even the records of this city for as long as we have been a city. And a lot of times, I requested records just to get them on the record. I also know that accounts were opened up, and you can read the audits. I've read every audit of this city over the years and as a town. And there have been misappropriate things done that the audit from the state has found. So when you think, hey, the fix is let's give somebody like the mayor all the power, you're taking away, this country was founded on 3 branches of government. I know Indiana allows it, but it eliminates, it lessens that 3rd branch of government at the local level. There's a lot of people, regardless of what Joe thinks, I talk to people all the time too. There's a lot of people who don't think a second-class city is a solution for Westfield. We can't even run a 3rd class right. So you got no business changing to a 2nd class. That's quotes from people that I'm hearing. Get your government together. You haven't held accountability for what's been going on in this government, and anyone who comes forward and wants to bring something out, it's like whack-a-mole, whack them on the head or say something about them. But the facts are the facts are the facts. They come out in the audit every single year. They come out in requests. They come out in people sitting here and asking questions. So I didn't expect to be speaking here today, but I'm sitting there getting just, really? I've lived in this city now for 30 years, and I lived in Carmel before this, and I have been involved in government. This just doesn't seem like our country. And at this point, when you start out and you say we're going to audit Grand Park, and what do we end up with? We would end up with a Baker-Tilly report. We didn't end up with an audit of Grand Park, and I don't care if you go back and audit it or not. I've watched those numbers since day one. Okay, I know what those numbers are, and anyone who wants to know what they are, they're actually out there. And you can actually go out and find all the documents and who signed what documents, because I've stood in this building before a council and said, why was this document signed by so-and-so? They had no authority. Earlier today, you're talking about who's going to build the roads, and we need to get a list of the roads. Do you realize that there's an Indiana code that says that there has to be a thoroughfare plan? It has to be passed by the APC and the council. And then If it's not being, you can only build to the thoroughfare plan. And if it's not, Section D says the APC will then tell, or can then tell the department building the roads what order they want them built in. Do you know that there's not a roundabout on the thoroughfare plan in the city of Westfield? The last thoroughfare plan was voted in 2011. It's part of the 2013 thoroughfare plan. I went to all those meetings too. Okay? So I love that everybody's interested, but I wish we'd go back and look at some of the facts, and I hope that you gentlemen will consider the facts. This isn't just an argument between the mayor and the clerk treasurer, because this argument continues between him and other people too.
I think,
So-
not to cut you off, I just think that nobody's saying you're right, Joe's right. I just think that.
I don't want to say that. I think the people need to say,
I think this is something that has to be brought to the public.
the
And they
people
should
should
have
speak,
an
but it
op-
shouldn't be Joe standing up here and speaking for everybody. And it shouldn't be me standing up here and speaking for everybody, but let me tell you, there are different opinions. But what is concerning is that nobody wants to look at the facts. And you can walk down to the clerk treasurer's office today, and you will be recorded by the administration. Why? Why is that happening? Why? And people know it because they've been in there and they've been recorded. This is out of control. I mean, we're no longer talking about city government. We haven't for a long time. There are Indiana codes that tell you how to run a government. And I stood right here with the mayor one day, and people surrounded me, and I said, when have you read the Indiana code on what your job as the mayor is or what your duties are? He says, I've never read it. Brian tells me what to do. I said, well, then maybe we wouldn't have so many conflicts if you knew what your job was, and we, the people, knew what our job was, and the clerk treasurer knew what their job was. But there's law about this. We seem to be lawless at this point, and then we're going to start suing everybody, and then we can't even get that resolved. But there are some wild things going on that just aren't correct in this city. And to simplify it and say a second-class city is going to fix it, hey, Carmel went through all that for a very long time, and the others have too, and it brings its own problems with it. So
It's a struggle.
it's a struggle, but I didn't believe I was going to stand up here to speak today, but I didn't think somebody was either. And I think it's a point that, and I hope it's not based on this. I hope I can believe you, but we're sitting here with two prospective mayoral candidates wanting to make this change. Maybe you need to get the government straightened out and get some laws in place. And I was on that internals committee, and I was at the council meeting when Cindy came in and explained it to them, and they had to pass it. I was at those meetings. There are recordings of those meetings when the council who sat there dismissed the clerk treasurer who was responsible to teach them. It's in the ordinance in the year 2016, and said, you're excused. I was still in there as a public person. They said, let's get somebody else to tell us how we're going to do this. So I have read that big old document too that's in the clerk treasurer's office. It is not what anybody intended, but you can call that my opinion, but it's there. Read it for yourself. I'm sorry, I don't want to seem too hot about this, but when you sit in a city, it has been, since 2008, 14 years, and we had a year in the council before that, and you just watch what's happening. And I was the first person who went into the clerk's treasurer's office, and I wasn't their friend, and I walked in with documents that were printed on the city's website, and I said, I want to know why this document is $8 million from this document. Who did this? And that's when I found out who did it. And it was the administration that did it. And it took 2 years for the clerk treasurer's office, and I followed them to make sure that all those numbers got back to what was reported and reconciled to the state. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and I don't want to be pointing fingers at people, and I wouldn't if I didn't have all the facts and the documentation to back it up. But it's a little bit frustrating sitting out here in the public, and other people know this too, and we hear this stuff, and nobody's resolving. You know, when you say, hey, let's resolve this, I'm behind you. Let's resolve it. But you can't bury it. It needs to be resolved, and these court cases aren't, you don't want to pay for court cases. I get that too. But you need somebody to admit what they've done. You need somebody to look at the facts, and we can't play cover up, cover up, cover up, because the documents are there, and it's why the mayor doesn't consider me a friend, because I do look at the documents, because I'm a financial person. You don't just tell me what you think. I need to see the actual facts, and the audits have brought them out. You know, your mayor opened up a multi-million-dollar account with utility funds and spent it down to zero. Got slapped on the hand by the audit board, but he got it done. You can't do those things. So I'm just saying, please, this is very serious. It's not to be done in a hurry. Understand where you're coming from, or you're doomed to repeat it. And understand what the facts are before you just lightly say. There's just so much there. And I think we just got two audit reports about it at the same time at the end of 20, and we saw a legal answer to it. I didn't agree with the legal answer, but they can make what answer they want. But the facts are the facts are the facts, and we need to start playing with the facts. And yeah, I follow politics too, but oh my gosh, I follow the facts so much more. And I'm tired of people being accused of things that they didn't do. I don't want to accuse anybody, but trust me, if I come up here and say something, I'll have the documentation to back it up.
Well,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
thank you. Okay. That's fine. One thing as a counselor, I think I have to do is give both sides a chance to present their case and see what happens.
Clear evidence as to why we need public input.
Yeah.
Right there.
But well, anyhow, I've already expressed what I thought, so that's that. But I do think that we need to give it, I'm not a person that sweeps things under the rug, I don't think, and I'm not gonna do that. We're gonna have a public hearing, but in the end, it's the council that has to decide. We have to either vote yea or nay, and we will. Joe, I disagree with you a little on some of the things that you said about we had to have more housing projects. You're probably right. I'm not, I don't want.
I want to differentiate between housing and commercial.
Well, but
Commercial is one that drives the TIF.
right, but the housing, we got that out there and, you know, in a cheaper land. It's not, nothing's cheap anymore. And we've gone against the plan document, and the community invested a lot of time in that planning document.
Well, we spent 2 years.
But it's not being followed very well, in my opinion. That's my opinion. But, yeah, that's true. So anyhow, these are things that come to pass, and we'll have to face them. You know, it's just like anything. We'll have to face them, and we'll make our decisions based on the facts, I hope, and we'll do that. So it's 3:00.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting before it gets any icier out there than what it already is.
Is the ice in now?
It's shifted. It's now asleep. Yeah,
Shifting?
It's now shifted.
Oh, boy.
So,
Okay, well, is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
It's been
guys.
a-
Appreciate it.
It's been an enlightening meeting.